everybody, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I'm building the Estes Star Orbiter, which is one of their Pro Series 2 rockets. This is a mid-power rocket, and you can fly this on anything from a C-11 all the way up to a G-80. Now, if you're going to do the really high mid-power engines, I would suggest doing one of the upgrades to this, which I will have a video on that as well a little bit later. So, like all of these, we're going to start with a check of all the parts and make sure we have a complete kit. Alright, let's open up the instructions here. Okay, and just check our parts list. So, motor mount tube there. Two body tubes, one of which is slotted for the fins. Okay, our fin material, 1/8 inch balsa. Alright, under here we've got our water slide decals. Okay, we've got a coupler and a nose cone centering rings. And then in the small parts package here we've got the parachute, elastic shock cord, 1/4 inch launch lugs, screw-on retaining ring, which I really love these things. And then I think that is it. Yep, so we have all of our parts here. And I'm going to put most of this away and we will get started. Our first task is to assemble the motor mount. And so first we just need to pop out the rings here. All right, if they're really sticky, use your hobby knife to cut through the tabs. These are coming off really easily. Alright, and you may want to take a little bit of sandpaper and just sand off the nubs both on the inside and outside there. And I'm just using some 100 or 150 grit sandpaper here. Alright, next we're going to make some measurements here on the body, or on the motor mount tube. Okay, so we need one at 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters from the aft end. And I'm going to go ahead and write aft on the inside of this tube so I don't get myself turned around later. Alright, so 13 millimeters is right there. Okay, and then we need another one at 11.4 centimeters or 4.5 inches. Okay, 11.4 is right there. And then one at 19.1 centimeters or 7.5 inches. And that'll be right here. Alright, and now we just want to dry fit the rings on here initially, just to make sure everything's fitting. Alright, and if they're too tight, just do a little bit more sanding on them. These are coming out quite nicely though. Okay, so that all looks good here. Now what I'm going to do is use a little bit of wood glue. You can also use white glue to glue these in place. And so to start with, I'm just going to back them off their marks a little bit, and it doesn't matter which way you go. So these are very thin rings. Alright, now I'm just going to run a bead of glue along the edge there. Okay, and then what I'll do is push the ring back to my mark there and into the glue. Now this is my aftmost ring. You want to make sure you smooth this really well because the motor mount's going to fit up against that. The motor mount, or the motor retainer, I should say. Alright, and excess glue you can just put on the back side of the ring into a fillet as well. Okay, and then I'm just going to do the same thing with the other two rings. I'll do that off camera and then come back. Here I have glue on both sides of each of the rings, and the rings are back in place. Now this needs to dry completely before we try putting it up into the body tube. So I'm going to set this aside for now, and we can work on some other things while this is drying. While we're waiting for the glue on the engine mount to dry, we can go ahead and put on the line for the launch lugs here. Alright, so for that, simply find a point halfway between two of the slots there. You can either measure that with a flexible tape or just kind of guesstimate it here. Okay, and then take this over to a door frame or similar thing and just extend this line all the way up. And I'm going to do that off camera and come back. Here I have my line drawn for the launch lugs. Now I'm also going to scoot ahead here for just a moment. Okay, so our launch lugs are going to be mounted flush with the aft end, and then the forward one is going to be at 12 inches or 30.5 centimeters from the aft end. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that while I've got it here. And we'll just do this one in inches because it's easier with this ruler. Alright, so one there, and then the other one will be back here. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of sandpaper. It doesn't really matter what grit. And I'm just going to roughen those areas a little bit so that when we go to glue the launch lugs on, it'll give it a better adhering surface. Okay, you don't need to do much, just a few strokes there. While we're still waiting for glue to dry on the motor mount, we can go ahead and prep the fins. So here I'm just using some 150 grit sandpaper, and I've just got a simple wood sanding block here, and this just helps give us a more even sanding experience. And here I'm going to start with them still in the stock board here. Now if yours have fallen out, that's fine, you can do this without having them in the board. But I'm first going to just do the faces here. Okay. Now just go ahead and cut through the little tabs that are left over here. Alright, now I'm just going to sand off the remains of those little nubs. Okay, now be careful when you sand, especially the fin tabs here. We don't really want to change their length. Otherwise they won't make proper contact inside. Next we'll have to decide how we want to airfoil these. And there's always a trade-off here. So the strongest fins have no rounding or tapering to them. They have the nice solid square edges. But that also will be the least aerodynamic. For balsa fins, unless I'm actually trying to set altitude records and things like that, usually I'll just round the leading edge here and leave the other one square. Okay, or if you want, you can round the leading and trailing edges. If you want really good aerodynamics and the least amount of drag, then go ahead and round the leading edge here and then taper to a knife point the trailing edge. You can also taper the tip edge here as well. Okay, I'm just going to do the leading edge here. And so to do that, I'm just going to start by starting to flatten out the corner edge there. Just knock that down. Okay, and then I'm just going to rotate my wrist as I'm sanding here to round this over. Alright, then we'll check it in cross-section here from both sides. Hopefully we got that fairly even, and we did. Okay. Now notice we got all these little fuzzies here where little fibers are coming up from the wood. And you can get rid of these in a few ways. You can go to a finer sandpaper and just keep getting finer and finer. So go from like a 150 to a 220 to a 320 to a 400 or so. And just make this smoother and smoother as you go along. Or you can prime the fins and then sand them again. And I often do that. What I'm going to do with these ones is I'm going to apply sanding sealer to the entire fin. And so that will trap those fibers, and then we'll come back and sand it all down with finer sandpaper. The sanding sealer also has the effect of filling in the low parts of the wood grain there. And just like if you do just bare sanding, the more coats and more sanding you do here, the smoother fin you get. So I'm going to go ahead and sand the leading edges of the two other fins, and then we'll come back and do the sanding sealer. Now for these fins, I'm using a polyurethane based sanding sealer. And you may have noticed that when I was cutting these out, there's kind of a jagged piece here that tore. There's also a little bit here. And if you want to fix those, you can either use wood filler, or I'm going to use this contour putty here that you can find in modeling stores. And the only reason I'm using this is it dries a bit faster. So I'm just going to add a little bit to the broken area there, and then just use a finger to smooth that in. Okay, and we'll let that dry. And you can either sand that before or after you add the sanding sealer. It's not really hard, so it'll sand either way. And do the same thing down here with this one. Kind of smooth that in. Now to do the fins here with the sanding sealer, you're going to want either a really cheap paintbrush that you don't mind destroying. I just use these cotton applicators. And you'll want some straight pins here. And then a piece of corrugated cardboard that you can stand nearly on end. So in this case, this is a cheap and dirty rocket stand just made out of an old rocket motor casing and some corrugated cardboard. But you'll see why here in just a minute. Okay, and what you want to do is take a pin and poke that into the root edge. It doesn't have to go very far, and be careful that you don't poke your fingers there. And now I'm just going to take my sanding sealer here, and I'm just going to brush that on with the grain all the way across there. Okay, the one I'm using is by R.E.A.R. rockets. You can also use like Minwax makes a sanding sealer. It's virtually identical to this. E-Rockets may just be repackaging it for all I know. As I've used both and they look and act just the same. Okay, just go ahead and go all the way across the surface. Now you don't need to go down here onto the fin tab. In fact, it's better if you don't, because we want that to be nice and porous so we get a good glue joint. Okay, we can come out here. Get that grain on the edges really well. Make sure you do where you sanded, because again we're using this to help trap those fibers that we had earlier. And if you've got a bigger jar of this stuff, like the original can, and you have smaller fins, you actually just dip the whole fin in and then let it drip. Now, try and get this as even as possible. It'll minimize sanding later on. Okay, and then once you've got it done, the pin you stick down into one of the corrugated areas of the cardboard, and that allows it to stand and dry. Alright, so I'm going to do that to the other two fins here, and then we'll come back. The sanding sealer on the fins is still drying, but the glue on our motor mount is ready to go. Okay, so again we want to make sure we get our aft end right here. There's a little glob of glue there. I'm going to remove that. Because as I mentioned earlier, the retainer ring has to fit fairly flush there. I'm not sure where that flowed around from, but we really don't want it in the way. Alright, now I have screwed this up in the past at least twice, and so I want you to learn from my mistakes. One is, don't do this with the 3 rings of glue inside the body tube. If you do, the rings swell before you get it all the way in there, and you end up with it hanging out too far. Okay? Also, here, alright, what they mean by this is when the mount is all the way in, that the aft ring should be flush with the body tube here. It does not mean that the engine mount tube should be flush with the body tube, which I have done at least twice on previous rockets. Okay, so learn from my mistake there, make sure that doesn't happen. Alright, now let's just dry fit this in. Make sure it's all going to move easily. Okay, and it does. Now something you can do here is take the nose cone, alright, and insert it in like this. And you don't have to shove it all the way in there. This is just kind of opening it up a little bit, kind of like a mandrel. And what that'll do is it'll make it easier to get that initial ring in there. The other ones follow fairly easily. Alright, now if we lay this against our tube with our aft ring flush where it's supposed to be, okay, that means the first ring of glue should be right up in here. And what I'm going to do here is take one of my applicators, alright, and measure that. So that actually goes up farther than my applicator can. That's alright. We're going to put that first ring of glue as far up inside as I can reach with this. Okay, so here I'm just going to get myself a nice big blob of glue on the end of my applicator. You can also just use a dowel or a scrap piece of balsa, but you want something you can get way up inside there. Alright, now I'm not touching the edges till I get up at the end there, and I'm rotating that around inside. I'm going to go ahead and give it some more, because we want a really good strong glue joint there. Again, so we don't have the motor mount flying up through the body tube. Alright, hold that for a minute. Now I'm going to slide this in Okay, and what I'm going to do is slide it in till just up to that middle ring, which is going to put the top ring not quite into our glue yet. All right, so don't shove this all the way. We're going to go to about there. And now what I'm going to do is put some more glue right around the inside of my body tube there. I'm being a little bit sloppy, but that's okay. Okay, so we want a good ring of glue in there. And then this is what will glue the aft ring. The middle ring really won't have any. Alright, and that's just, if you do it the way the instructions show, the middle ring still won't really have any because you'll shove the forward ring through it and most of the glue will just get pushed forward that way. Alright, look down in here. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and push that in, and you want to do this all in one motion so that it doesn't hang up. Alright. Now I've actually got this just a little bit past, it's not quite flush, but that way when I go to put the motor retaining ring in, I'll be using some epoxy with that, and that epoxy will kind of ooze down and form a nice surface around there and reinforce the aft motor mount ring there. Okay, so it's not flush, I'm just leaving a millimeter or two inside there, and that will work fine. And in fact, you can take the motor mount retainer ring here, and I'm just going to dry fit this on. Be careful you don't shove the motor mount further in. Alright, but it's going to be flush in there, and it should be just above that the aft ring there, like it is there. Okay, so I'm going to take that back off so I don't glue it on prematurely. Alright, and I'm going to let that dry. Here's one of the fins after the sanding sealer has dried. And I'm going to use some 220 grit sandpaper to smooth that down again. Alright, now notice I've been sanding in the same direction as the wood grain here. And eventually what I'm going to get down to is, on the high spots I'll have bare wood once more, but the low spots will still contain the sanding sealer. And then if you want, you can add excuse me, another layer of sanding sealer there, let it dry, sand it down again. So the more layers and the more sandings you have, the smoother the fin will get. Don't forget to do the edges. All right, and you'll notice here we don't have all those little fibers sticking up that we had before. Okay, and get those tip and trailing edges. Here we're mainly wanting to seal the pores in the wood. And for that trailing edge, you might just want to put this on the table, sand it this way. That way you don't start bowing inward. Alright. Now I'm going to give this another coat of sanding sealer. I need to sand the other two fins, which I'm going to do off camera. I'll also add the second coat off camera, so that when I come back, the fins will be ready to go and be attached to the rocket. Here are my fins, and instead of putting on a second layer of the sanding sealer, I decided to go ahead and add a layer of the filling sandable primer. Now that you can find usually in the automotive department of stores instead of just in the paint department, and both Krylon and Rust-Oleum make a version of it. So what I'm going to do now is take some 220 grit sandpaper and just sand that down. Now I'll warn you, this tends to clog up sandpaper really quickly, and so you want to have some extra on hand. But the idea here is that we'll sand down the primer from the high points, and so we'll see bare wood again, and then the low points will still be filled with the primer there. So there's one fin there, and you can see now just the low spots still have the primer in them, and this is pretty smooth. Now if you like, you can add additional primer and resand it just like you could with sanding sealer. This is probably good enough for me here, and when I put these on the rocket they'll get another coat of the primer as well. So I'm going to do the other two fins off camera, and when I come back we'll mount the fins. My fins are all sanded and we're ready to put them onto the rocket itself. So here we're just going to put a nice even bead of glue along the root edge. And make sure you do the fin tab as well here, because that's going to be glued onto the motor mount. Alright, and then we're just going to place this into the fin slot and slide it back so the edge of the fin is flush with the body tube. Okay, and then we're just going to let that dry for a while. The fin slot helps keep it aligned with the body tube, so the only thing we have to make sure of is that the fin is sticking straight up. And if you're using wood glue, you want to wait at least 5 minutes. If you're using white glue, probably at least 10. But then once that's in place, you can go ahead and do the same thing to the other two fins, which I will do off camera. My fins are all glued into place and nice and straight there. So next I'm going to add the launch lugs. Here I'm going to use a stand so that I can just keep these nice and horizontal. Now we sanded the body tube here where we were going to put these, and now I'm going to do the same thing for the launch lugs themselves. So I'm just going to take the launch lug here and just roughen up a little bit in a line. And do the same thing with the other one here. Okay, and then we can add just a little bit of glue there. Okay, and I'll place that on my line. Okay, and this one's going to be flush with the aft end. Okay, and then we've got the other one that we're going to put at 12 inches from the aft end. Okay, so that one's going to go here. Okay, and now I'm going to take and sight down the body tube, and so my launch lugs should all be straight with reference to the line there, and also to each other. And that all looks pretty good. Okay, so we'll let the launch lugs dry for a little while, and then when we come back we will do the fillets. The glue on my fins is mostly dry enough to handle. And so now we're going to put the fillets on the fins and on the launch lugs. And you can actually do all of these at the same time as long as you keep the rocket horizontal. And so I'm just going to run a bead of glue along the base of each fin. And I'll usually do this 2 facing fins at a time. And then just take a finger, smooth that in, and then wipe off the excess. Okay, we'll come back to that launch lug when we get the fins done. Alright, so again, glue. Now if you like to have really built up fillets so it kind of blends into the body tube, you can do that, but I recommend doing it in several layers, not in one big heavy layer of glue. Because inevitably it's going to dry unevenly or sag or generate bubbles, all sorts of other things that just make the whole process harder in the long run. And what can be easier if you want more built up fillets is once you've got a fillet of glue down and that dries, then you can overlay that with wood filler or contour putty or even epoxy putty. Alright, so now we'll do the launch lugs here. Alright, and now I'm going to let this dry horizontally until that glue is completely dry. While we're waiting for the fillets to dry, we can go ahead and install the shot cord here. So we're going to need the shot cord mount that's on the first page here. And we just want to make sure that we're not cutting through anything that might be important later. But we've already done the other steps. If you don't want to cut up your instructions, you can simply make a photocopy of this and cut that out. Okay, and we need the shot cord itself, which is in the small parts bag. Right here. Okay, and so all we need to do here is take some of our glue, and we're going to run a fairly heavy bead down through this. Because we're actually going to make a laminate of glue and paper here. And I'm going to set the shot cord at kind of an angle here over the 3 and the 2. And then I'm going to take the 1 section and I'm going to fold that up over and onto the 2. Okay, and then I'm going to take the 2 and fold that up over onto the 3. Now the reason I put this at an angle is this way the shot cord will lay beside itself down inside of this instead of right on top of itself. Alright, we want to squish all that glue around in there so that we just have glue and paper and not a bunch of air. Okay, if you got excess glue, just go ahead and smear it on here, because that's going to be the next part we're going to glue. Oops, anyway, that came apart there. I think we can salvage it. Alright. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit more glue to this. And now we're going to place this at least 1.5 inches down inside here. So I'm just going to tuck that down, and if you can reach farther, that's even better. All right, but we need at least 1.5 inches so the nose cone does not impinge upon it. Okay, and then we can just turn this over, and now I'm going to press the shot cord mount in between the tube and my other hand here, and just flatten that in there as much as I can. Let's see if we can get a little bit of a view of it there. There, you can see it down in there. Okay. Try and keep it flat. We don't want it raised if we can avoid it. Alright, and now that can be set aside to dry. Something else we can do while we're waiting for the fillets to dry is go ahead and prep the nose cone. And so here you may have a little bit of flash stuck in that eyelet, and usually it comes out fairly easily, so you can just cut that out with your hobby knife. Okay, now this nose cone is made in 2 halves, so there's a seam here and one opposite that. Now, depending on how prominent it is, you may or may not want to do anything about it. So if you do, one of the things you can do is first of all sand this with some 150 grit sandpaper, especially over the seam. Okay, and then I'm going to sand all the rest of it so it's even. Okay, and then you can just wipe that down with a moist rag or paper towel. I'm using just a little bit of rubbing alcohol here on some tissues, just so you can get that dust off and see better. Okay, so what I've done is that has knocked down the seam here, but part of the seam actually goes inside, so there's a little bit of a groove there. It's not very noticeable. If we look on the other side, it's barely noticeable there at all. So the next thing you can do is move to 220 grit sandpaper here and sand the whole thing. Alright, and then once again we'll go ahead and just wipe this down, get the dust off. Alright, now if we look at it, my groove is almost completely gone there, and I think if we use some of the filling sandable primer on this, it'll be completely gone. Okay, and even if you don't have that noticeable groove there, it's a good idea to use some very fine sandpaper to sand the nose cone, as it will make your paint adhere better. Okay, so I can set this aside. I'll probably go ahead and put some primer on it while I'm waiting for everything else. Now, I may not get around to painting this whole rocket for this video just because we're at the start of winter here and the weather's kind of unpredictable. Right now it's really windy. Something else we can do while we're waiting for fillets to dry is assemble the parachute. So go ahead and just open this up. Now I'm adding to this a snap swivel, and you can buy this in the fishing section of most sporting goods and department stores. But this just allows quick change of the parachute, and at least in theory helps keep the shroud lines from winding up and getting super coiled. Alright, but most of this parachute's already assembled. We just need to get everything in line. Go ahead and open up the sheet and then find all the shroud lines here. Get them untangled from each other. Okay, so there should be one that goes across the middle and then one on each side of that. All right, I'm just going to gather all those around one finger here. And then I'm going to take my other hand here, I'm going to hold the parachute sheet in the middle. Okay, and I'm just going to pull on these lines until all of the corners there are at approximately the same level. Okay, so they're all kind of bunched up there. All right, but all those corners are about in the same spot. Okay, so now I'm going to hold those loops up here with one hand. So at no time am I letting go of this so that they'll change length. I'm always holding on with one hand or the other. Okay, I'm going to take the loops there and squish them down. On my snap swivel here, I'm going to pass the loops through the swivel end on this eyelet. Okay, still holding on back here with my fingers. And I'm going to open those loops up again. So now I've got my swivel hanging down there. I'm going to take the entire snap swivel and pass it through those loops. I'm going to pull those loops downward, and now I'm just going to tighten everything. So that forms a nice little knot there. And now I'm going to take my parachute once more and make sure that everything is still where it should be. Alright, so we shouldn't see any sagging lines and things like that. Now if you do have a problem, you can loosen this up and try again. If you've got it where you want it, then go ahead and take your glue here and just put a little dot of glue right on those shroud lines. Getting kind of low on glue here. Okay, just a little touch there. And just work that around and into the knot. And that will keep those from coming undone. And then when we're ready, you simply open up the snap part here, pass that through the eyelet of the nose cone, and then clamp it down again. And it's ready to go. And this makes it easy for people who don't like to store the parachutes in the rockets. They can simply unclip it, hang up the parachute, or put it in a box or whatever, and then clip it on. This also works well if, for example, you've got a really windy day and you want to change out the normal 18-inch parachute here for maybe a 15-inch, so it comes down a little bit faster. Alright, so I'm going to let that glue dry, and we'll just set the parachute aside until we're ready for the final assembly. The fillets on the fins are dry, and they're looking pretty good. I don't see any bubbles or globs there. But these are minimum fillets. Okay, so if you would like to have a built-up fillet that will help reduce interference drag, you can do that with glue, or you can do that with epoxy putty, or with contour putty, or even with wood filler, and just build those up from there. But my launch lug fillets there, they've got some bubbles in there. And so to treat that, I'm going to use some contour putty here. And this is kind of like wood filler, except it's got an alcohol base and it's got a much finer fill to it. And it dries fairly quickly. It's alcohol based. And so what I'm going to do here is get basically a popsicle stick like this and use that to shape things. Okay, so I'm going to take this filler here and I'm simply going to apply it over the glue fillets. Alright, and you can do this with your finger. It's not toxic. This is going to give me a little bit deeper fillet though than when I do it with my finger. Okay, and you can shave away excess after it dries. It sands really well. Okay, I can turn this over. You do have to work this really quickly though, because it does dry fast. it'll start to crack and such when you work it if you don't do it right away. Okay, and I'll just cut that stuff off later. I'm going to do the same thing up on the forward launch lug here. Okay, and I'll just let this dry, and when it's dry I'll go ahead and sand that down. I probably won't show the sanding on camera here because sanding is really boring to watch, so I don't want to have any more of it than I need. And as I said, if you like the built up fillets on the fins, do it just like I did on my launch legs there. Just run a bead of the filler in there and then take a popsicle stick or other tool or even your finger to smooth that in. I got around the bad weather for painting by painting my rocket in sections in a fume hood. And now we're going to put everything together. So first we're going to need the engine retainer, and I've got a small amount of 5-minute epoxy here. It doesn't take a lot. I do recommend that you wear gloves when you do this though, because repeated exposure to epoxy can cause an allergic-like reaction, and nobody really wants that. So here I'm just putting a bead of epoxy all the way around the edge of the motor tube here. And when we put the retainer on, that's going to squish it all forward. Okay, so now we just take the screw part of the retainer and just kind of twist that on. Okay, and then we'll just let that cure for at least 5 minutes, but otherwise that can just stay and cure. We're not doing anything else with it. While the epoxy is curing on the motor mount, we can go to the other end of the aft section of the rocket and install the coupler. For this you just need white glue or wood glue. And I'm just going to run a bead of glue right around the inside edge here. Whoop. A little sloppy there. Okay, and then we're going to take this coupler and we need to mark it. I forgot to do that. Alright, so this is 3 inches, and we just need to mark at 1.5 right here. And that's how far we're going to slide this in. So now we can just pop that on there. Okay, and do this fairly quickly. Give it a little rotation there to seat it well. Next we're going to attach the forward body tube, and we need to make sure that we get this right. So this end has the shock cord in it, so we need to glue the other end. And we're going to do this in the same way, so just run a bead of glue just inside the edge there. Okay, and in the same way, we're just going to slide that on. All right, give it a little bit of twist as we go there. Okay, just remove any glue that comes out, and we're going to let that dry. Alright, and then we need to take the shock cord, free end here, tie it to the nose cone. And yes, these are very contrasting bright colors, and I did that intentionally to make this easier to see at high altitude. Alright, so now we're just going to tie 2 half hitches or a double overhand knot here. Cinch that down really well. Okay, and then the excess here we're going to cut off back to about 1/2 centimeter or around 1/4 inch there, so that it does not get caught between the shoulder and the nose cone. And then our last task is to attach the parachute. Alright, so I put my snap swivel on, and that can clip in there. Alright, so there we have our parachute, and I can't fit the entire rocket under the camera here. The last thing to do is to apply the decals, and I've already cut mine out here, so these are the 4 decals. These 2 with the checkerboard patterns are going to be wraps around the body tubes, and then the Star Orbiter name decal can go just about anywhere on here. You just want to make sure that your rocket has a light enough background that you're going to see these. Over here to my right, I've got a basin of room temperature water, and I've mixed in just a little bit of white glue. And this is a tip from Tim Van Milligan on the Apogee website where they show this. And the idea is that the glue will help the decals adhere and not peel off later. Okay, so I'm going to start with the larger of the 2 wraps, and this can go at the seam between the 2 tubes and kind of hide that. So I'm going to put this in my water and let that sit for about 15 to 20 seconds. And of course the decals are not necessary for flight, so if you decide that you don't want to use the decals and go with some completely different artistic theme, go for it. Alright, this is your rocket, you do with it what you want. Okay, now to test this, I'm just going to apply a little tension. Okay, and it should move a little bit like it's doing there. So now I'm just going to move a little bit of that out, and then just hold that there. Alright, now I'm going to slowly pull the paper out from under the decal. And then I can just roll the rocket here. Okay, now if it starts to move off a little bit, you can just kind of apply a little bit of tension there and move it around. And I'm actually using the seam between the 2 body tubes as a guide and lining up this middle section of pattern along it. Alright, and then this should overlap just a little bit at the end there, just like that. Okay, now I'm going to take a tissue here and just gently wipe that to remove any bubbles and crinkles. Get rid of the excess water. Alright, so there's our first one. And I'm going to switch the rocket around here. And let's switch it this way. Okay, so my other wrap I'm going to put just below the nose cone here at the top of this tube. Same as before, we're going to soak that for about 15 to 20 seconds. There we go. Alright, now as before, just going to start start this up here. And now I'm using the edge of the body tube as my guide. So I just need to keep a constant distance between the stripe and the edge of the body tube. Okay, man, that came out almost perfect. And once again, we will just gently wipe away the air bubbles and excess water here. A little bit of a crinkle right there. We'll just wipe it down and move it toward the end. Okay. Next I'm going to do the Star Orbiter logo. Now here I want to make sure and position this so that it's opposite my launch lugs. That way when it's on the launcher, hopefully the rocket and its decals will be facing the viewers. Let's see if I can get this to balance here. Alright, now this one's kind of big. I'm going to have to stick it in my water on its edge. Okay, it's loose on that end. There we go. Alright, so here I'm going to try to center this as much as possible. It feels like a lot of tension. It looks pretty straight there. So we'll go with that. And here I'm going to start from the middle and work my way outward as I squeegee this off. Those edges don't want to grab there. Got a little bit crooked there. Alright, I think we'll go with that. Alright, and then the final one is the Estes logo. We'll just plop that in there, and I'm going to put that on one of my fins. So bring this around here. Something happened right at the end of that last video clip where I was putting on the Estes logo here. It goes on just like the other ones, and so now I've got this installed there. And so now we can take a look at the whole rocket coming underneath here. From the nose cone, we've got our wrap, our star orbiter name, another wrap, and then coming all the way down, we've got our Estes symbol. Alright, my motor retainer is fully installed here, and so this rocket is ready to go. I hope you had a good time building this. Have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.